The millionaire's daughter didn't speak, until the garbage man won her first word. Since the day she was abandoned, she hid inside a silence even her father couldn't reach. But a simple wave, an origami in hands stained with earth, was enough to open her world. And when the mother tried to return, it was the garbage man's name the girl screamed, begging him not to go. The morning crept slowly over Denver, bringing with it that soft light that spilled over the mountains and descended through the inclined streets of the Baker neighborhood. It was April, and the Colorado autumn painted the trees in golden hues that contrasted with the clear blue sky. The old houses, with their colorful facades and wrought-iron gates, held stories that time insisted on preserving. Among them, a yellow corner townhouse stood out for its wide porch and a garden that, once lush, now seemed forgotten under the weight of dry leaves and unpruned branches. Inside that house, the silence was different. It was not the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning, but something denser, almost palpable, as if the air refused to carry any sound that was not absolutely necessary. In the spacious rooms, decorated with antique furniture inherited from previous generations, every object seemed frozen in time. The lace curtains remained perpetually half-drawn, filtering the sunlight in a melancholic way. The dining room clock marked the hours with a metallic tick-tock that echoed off the empty walls, a reminder that yes, time was still passing, even when everything seemed to have stopped. Gabriel Hayes was 42 years old, but he seemed to carry the weight of many more. An architect by trade, he had set aside the creative projects that once defined his career to dedicate himself only to practical and bureaucratic renovations, jobs that required neither passion nor inspiration. His routine consisted of waking up early, preparing a breakfast that was almost never shared, trying to establish some kind of contact with his daughter, and then heading to his office where he spent hours in front of blueprints that no longer moved him. Returning home in the late afternoon, he would repeat the ritual. He would try to talk, receive only distant glances, and then surrender to the silence that dominated every corner of that residence. Valentina was only 7 years old, but her eyes carried a sadness far too old for her years. Ever since that January morning when she woke up and realized her mother was no longer there, something inside her had broken. There was no farewell, no explanation, just emptiness. Marina, her mother, had left without a trace, without a note, without a promise of return. She simply vanished from the girl's life as if she had never existed, leaving behind a child who did not understand abandonment, and a man who did not know how to deal with his daughter's pain. In the first few days, Gabriel tried to explain. He used soft words, metaphors about journeys and needing time. But Valentina didn't react. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't ask questions. She just looked at her father with those dark, deep eyes, and then turned her gaze back to her bedroom window, where she spent most of her time. There, sitting on the cushioned windowsill, she watched the street, the cars passing by, the people going on with their lives, oblivious to the small, motionless figure behind the glass. The months dragged on in this pattern. Gabriel sought medical help, but no clear diagnosis was given. The professionals spoke of emotional trauma, of the need for time, for patience. They suggested therapies that Valentina would not accept. She simply refused to enter the offices or, when forced, remained in absolute silence for the entire sessions, staring intently at a spot on the floor until the time was up and she could go home back to her refuge at the window. The family's housekeeper, Mrs. Ellie, was the only constant female presence in Valentina's life, a woman of 58 with graying hair always tied in a low bun and hands calloused from decades of work. Mrs. Ellie had formed a special bond with the girl. She didn't try to force conversations or impose closeness. She was simply there, preparing the meals that Valentina ate in silence, tidying the room carefully so as not to invade the child's space, leaving small gestures of affection scattered around the house. A piece of candy the girl liked on her bedside table, a drawing she had made years ago discreetly taped to the refrigerator, a fresh flower in the vase by the window every Monday. Gabriel watched all this with a mixture of gratitude and helplessness. He felt he was failing as a father, that he should be the one to reach his daughter, but he didn't know how. Guilt gnawed at him, especially in the early hours of the morning when he would wake up and wonder if there were signs he had ignored, if he could have prevented Marina's departure, if he should have realized the marriage was crumbling before it was too late. Marina had never been a particularly affectionate mother, but she had also never shown any desire to abandon her family. At least not explicitly. Gabriel replayed their conversations, their silences, their restrained arguments, trying to find the exact moment when everything began to fall apart. But the memories were confusing and painful. The truth was, Gabriel barely knew his own wife. Their marriage had been more of a social construct than a passionate union. They had met at a graduation party. Marina was beautiful and ambitious. He was a promising architect. It seemed to make sense at the time. They married quickly, had Valentina in the first year, and then life became a sequence of automatic routines. Marina worked in marketing, traveled frequently, and spent more time away from home than in it. Gabriel had taken on most of the childcare from the beginning, which created a deep connection between father and daughter that ironically now seemed insufficient to bring her back. Every morning, Gabriel opened Valentina's bedroom door with hope that maybe, on that day, she would have woken up differently, that maybe she would look at him and smile or say anything, even just a whispered good morning. But every morning was the same. She was awake, always waking up before him, already positioned at the window in her simple dress, her bare feet swinging slightly. She wouldn't turn her head when he entered. She wouldn't react when he approached. She just kept looking outside, at that world that kept moving while hers remained frozen. "Good morning, sweetheart." Gabriel's voice came out soft, almost a whisper, as if afraid of breaking something even more fragile. "Did you sleep well?" Silence. "Mrs. Ellie made that cornmeal cake you like. How about we have breakfast together today?" Silence. Gabriel would sigh, kiss the top of his daughter's head, and go downstairs to face another day. Mrs. Ellie would be waiting for him in the kitchen, always with a fresh cup of coffee and that understanding look that said everything without needing words. She also suffered seeing the situation, but she possessed a patience that Gabriel admired and envied. "Mr. Hayes, she'll come back," Mrs. Ellie would say, pouring the coffee. "Children have their own way of healing things. She just needs her time." "But how much time, Ellie? It's been 4 months. 4 months without a word, without a smile. I don't know what to do anymore." The housekeeper placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes you do more by doing less. Just being present is a lot. Mrs. Marina left, but you stayed. That counts, even if the girl doesn't show it now." Gabriel wanted to believe it. He wanted to trust that just being there was enough. But with each passing day, the weight of doubt grew heavier. What if Valentina never came back? What if that silence became permanent? What if he lost her not to physical distance, but to an emotional abyss from which she could never escape? The street where they lived was busy during the day. The Baker neighborhood had that charm of being both bohemian and residential, where bars coexisted with family homes, where artists and professionals shared the narrow sidewalks. All sorts of people passed by, students on their way to the university, shopkeepers opening their stores, residents walking their dogs, tourists photographing the slopes and old buildings. Among all these passers-by, there was one man who stood out for the almost mathematical regularity of his routine. Every morning, at precisely 7:15, he would pass down the street with his cart of tools and gardening equipment. He was a simple-looking man, probably around 45, with sun-weathered skin, large calloused hands, and a lean but strong body, shaped by years of physical labor. He always wore practical clothes, worn denim trousers, and neutral-colored t-shirts. He had a calm way of walking, unhurried, like someone who has accepted the rhythm of life and doesn't try to force anything. His name was Arthur Stone. He worked as a freelance gardener, taking care of the gardens of several houses in the neighborhood. He had no company, no employees. It was just him, his tools, and the deep knowledge of plants he had, accumulated over a lifetime. He had that gift for making things grow, for understanding what each species needed, for transforming abandoned flower beds into small green paradises. Arthur lived in a small rented room in the lower part of the neighborhood, near the bustling commerce of South Broadway. It was a tiny space, barely fitting a bed, a two-burner stove, and a small table. But it was his. He had achieved that independence with great effort. After difficult years, he preferred not to revisit in his thoughts. Now his life was simple, and he liked it that way. Waking up early, working outdoors, feeling the earth in his hands, seeing the concrete result of his effort at the end of each day. But there was a wound in Arthur that never completely healed. A daughter he hadn't seen in 3 years. Manuela was 9 years old now, but he only knew this from the rare news that came through mutual acquaintances. The separation from Manuela's mother, Denise, had been painful and complicated. She had accused him of having no ambition, of not being able to give the family the life they deserved, of being just a man too simple for the modern world. The argument ended with her taking Manuela to Chicago, where she found a better job and started a new life. Arthur tried to stay in touch, but Denise made everything difficult. She would move without notice, not answer his calls, and make excuses so he couldn't visit his daughter. Over time, Arthur understood that a legal battle cost money he didn't have, and that forcing his presence in Manuela's life might cause more pain than good. So he accepted the distance, but he carried the longing like a constant weight in his chest. Every morning as he passed the houses in the neighborhood on his way to his day's jobs, Arthur would observe the windows. He liked to see people starting their days, the curtains opening, the children getting ready for school. There was something comforting in all that normality, and it was in this distracted observation that he began to notice the girl. She was always there, in that second-floor window of the yellow house, motionless, staring at nothing. At first, Arthur didn't pay much attention. He thought she was just a bored child, maybe grounded, maybe waiting for someone. But as the days passed and the girl remained there, always in the same position, always with that vacant expression, he began to worry. It wasn't normal. There was something wrong with that stillness, with that lost gaze. Arthur was not a man to meddle in other people's lives. He had learned early on that everyone carries their own battles, and that offering unsolicited help sometimes causes more problems than solutions. But there was something about that girl that touched him in a strange way. Maybe it was her age, close to Manuela's. Maybe it was the loneliness that emanated from her even from a distance. Maybe it was just the natural sensitivity of someone who has suffered enough to recognize suffering in others. He started discreetly. One day as he passed, he raised his hand and waved. The girl didn't react, didn't even seem to notice. The next day, he tried again. Nothing. But Arthur didn't give up. He continued to wave every morning, sometimes making a silly face, other times just smiling. He didn't expect a response, had no expectations. He did it because he felt he should, because something in him insisted that this small gesture could mean something. 2 weeks of ignored waves went by until on a Thursday morning it happened. Arthur waved as usual, and for the first time he saw the girl move her head. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but it was there. She looked directly at him. And then, at the corner of her lips, something appeared that could be considered the sketch of a smile. It lasted only a second before disappearing, but it had existed. Arthur's heart clenched. He didn't know why that moved him so much, but it did. He felt as if he had witnessed something important, as if a small victory had been won. He waved with more enthusiasm and continued on his way, but for the rest of the day he couldn't get the image of the child out of his head. Valentina also felt something different that morning. For the first time in months, she had experienced a sensation that wasn't pain or emptiness. It was brief, almost frightening in its novelty, but real. That man who passed by every morning, with his simple manner and persistent waves, had managed to reach something inside her. She couldn't explain what, but she had been reached. The next morning, Friday, Valentina was not at the window when Arthur passed. He felt a pang of disappointment but carried on. He was a few yards ahead when he heard a noise. He turned and saw the girl standing at the house's gate, still in her pajamas, barefoot, holding the iron bars with both hands. She was looking at him with those large, serious eyes. Arthur stopped. He stood there, not knowing what to do, not wanting to scare her. Then, slowly, He set down his tool cart and walked back to the gate. He knelt to be at her eye level. "Hi," he said softly. Valentina didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Arthur searched his pocket and found a piece of wrapping paper he used to protect some of his tools. His hands, accustomed to dealing with soil, also had a curious skill with origami, something he had learned years ago from a Japanese client. In a few precise movements, he folded the paper and created a small tsuru, a paper bird. It wasn't colorful, but it had form and delicacy. "For you," he said, extending the origami through the bars of the gate. Valentina looked at the paper bird, then at Arthur, then back at the bird. Slowly she reached out her hand and took it. Her fingers briefly touched his during the exchange, and in that instant something passed between them. A silent connection, a mutual recognition of some shared wound, even if neither of them knew exactly what it was. "It's pretty, isn't it? It's a tsuru. They say it brings good luck." The girl clutched the origami to her chest, and for the first time in months, Gabriel, who was watching everything from the living room window with his heart racing, saw his daughter smile. It wasn't a huge smile, but it was genuine. It was real. Arthur smiled back, waved, and stood up. "I have to go to work now, okay? But I pass by here every day. See you around." He returned to his cart and continued down the street, but that day his step had something different about it, a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. And back at the yellow house, Valentina went inside holding her paper bird as if it were the most precious treasure in the world, while Gabriel watched it all, not fully understanding what he had just witnessed, but knowing with absolute certainty that something very important had just happened. That night, for the first time in months, Valentina ate dinner at the table with her father. She didn't speak, didn't comment on her day, but she was there, present in a way she hadn't been before. And when Gabriel put her to bed, he noticed she had placed the paper bird on her nightstand, where she could see it as soon as she woke up. It was Mrs. Ellie who verbalized what Gabriel was still processing. "That man did in 5 minutes what no one could do in 4 months," she said, while washing the dinner dishes. "Who is he, Mr. Hayes?" "He's the gardener who passes by every morning. Arthur, I think is his name. He works at the houses in the neighborhood." Mrs. Ellie dried her hands on a dish towel and looked at Gabriel with that expression that usually preceded some uncomfortable but necessary truth. "Then maybe it's time you hired a gardener." Gabriel looked out the window at the neglected garden, the uncared-for plants, the overgrown lawn, the withered flowers. Yes, he definitely needed a gardener, but it wasn't about the garden. It was about Valentina. It was about that smile he couldn't provoke in his daughter, but that a stranger had managed with a simple gesture. The decision was made. The next day, when Arthur passed by, Gabriel would be waiting, with a proposal, with a hope, with the silent desperation of a father willing to do anything to see his daughter start living again. Saturday dawned with that crisp air characteristic of a Denver autumn. Gabriel woke up earlier than usual, driven by a mix of anxiety and hope he hadn't felt in months. He had mentally rehearsed several times how he would approach Arthur, what words he would use, how he would explain the situation without seeming too invasive or desperate. But the truth was, he was desperate, and maybe there was no harm in showing it. He made coffee, organized some papers in his office to feign busyness, and then positioned himself strategically near the living room window from where he could see the street. Mrs. Ellie watched everything with a discreet smile as she prepared breakfast. She had known Gabriel long enough to understand that when he made a decision there were no half measures. He either completely ignored a problem or dived headfirst into the solution. Valentina came down for breakfast without needing to be called, which was already a small miracle. She had the paper bird in her hand, carrying it with the care of someone holding something sacred. She sat at the table and accepted the glass of milk Mrs. Ellie offered her, drinking slowly while looking out the window, as if she were expecting something. "She's waiting too," Gabriel thought, feeling his chest tighten at the realization. His daughter was waiting for the gardener to pass by, that stranger who, with a simple gesture, had achieved what doctors, therapists, and her own father could not, to pull her out of that cocoon of silence, if only for a few moments. At precisely 7:15, Arthur appeared at the corner, pushing his tool cart. Gabriel's heart sped up. He looked at Valentina and saw her eyes light up slightly, her body leaning forward in her chair. Without a second thought, he opened the front door and walked down the porch steps to the gate. "Good morning," he called out, trying to sound casual. Arthur stopped, a bit surprised. He immediately recognized the house, the girl, who was now watching him from the living room window. "Good morning," he replied, polite but cautious. He had worked long enough in affluent neighborhoods to know that sometimes the residents of these large houses could be unpredictable, some extremely cordial and others deeply suspicious. "You're a gardener, right?" "I am, sir. Arthur Stone. I work around the neighborhood, take care of several gardens." Gabriel opened the gate and made an inviting gesture. "Could you come in for a moment? I'd like to talk to you about a job." Arthur hesitated for just a second before accepting. He left his cart on the sidewalk, locked with a simple padlock, and came in. The front garden was indeed neglected. Flower beds overrun with weeds, unpruned rose bushes, the lawn uneven and patchy. His trained eye already identified what needed to be done. A general cleanup, replanting, soil nutrition, establishing a proper irrigation system. "It's in need of some attention," he commented, almost to himself. "That's why I want to hire you," Gabriel said, getting straight to the point. "The garden has been like this for months. I don't have the time or the skill to take care of it myself, and my daughter—" He paused, searching for the right words. "She liked you. Your gesture yesterday, the paper bird." Arthur glanced at the window where Valentina was watching everything, still holding the origami. He smiled discreetly and waved at her. The girl responded with a shy wave of her hand, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "She doesn't speak," Gabriel continued, his voice growing heavier. "Ever since her mother left 4 months ago, she hasn't said a word. She barely reacts to anything. But yesterday, when you gave her that bird, I saw my daughter smile for the first time in so long. So I thought," Gabriel took a deep breath, "maybe if you came here regularly, took care of the garden, maybe that would help. I don't know if it makes sense, but it's the only thing that's worked so far." Arthur was silent for a moment, processing. He understood the man's pain. It was the pain of a father who doesn't know how to reach his own child, of someone who tries everything, and nothing works. He knew that feeling well, though from the opposite direction. He wanted to reach Manuela, but was prevented. Gabriel wanted to reach Valentina, but she was the one who was closed off. "I can start on Monday," he said finally. "I'll come 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We'll start slow, see what the garden needs. As for payment—" Gabriel interrupted with a gesture. "Don't worry about that. I'll pay what's fair. You name the price." They negotiated the practical details right there on the porch. Arthur would be discreet, take care of the garden without making excessive noise, and always come in the morning. Gabriel would provide the necessary materials. It was a simple professional arrangement, but both men knew there were unsaid layers to their agreement. It wasn't just about plants and soil. It was about a wounded child and a fragile hope for healing. When Arthur left, saying goodbye with another wave to Valentina, Gabriel went back inside the house feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: expectation. It wasn't a certainty that it would work, but it was the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of that dark tunnel. Mrs. Ellie was waiting for him with a fresh cup of coffee. "You did well, Mr. Hayes. Sometimes God puts the right people in our path when we need them most." "I hope you're right, Ellie, I really do." On Monday, Arthur arrived at 8 in the morning, as agreed. He brought not only his usual tools, but also some flower seedlings, seeds, and a bag of fertilized soil. He had spent Sunday planning what he would do in that garden. It wasn't just a job. It was a mission that, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, had become personal. Valentina was at the window, waiting. When she saw him come through the gate, she went down the stairs faster than usual and stood at the living room door that opened to the garden. She didn't go out, just stood there, watching. Gabriel, who was working in the adjacent office, could see everything and decided not to interfere. He would let it unfold naturally. Arthur noticed the girl's presence, but didn't make a point of calling her or forcing interaction. He simply started working. First, he assessed the flower beds, tested the soil with his hands, and checked which plants could be saved and which needed to be replaced. Then, with precise and careful movements, he began to clear the weeds, remove the dry leaves, and aerate the earth. There was something mesmerizing about the way he worked. His hands moved with confidence but also with gentleness, as if each plant deserved individual respect. He sometimes talked to himself, low comments about the state of the roots, about how a certain species needed more sun, about how the soil was good but needed nutrients. The comments weren't for anyone in particular. It was just his way of working. After almost an hour, Valentina took a step outside, just one. She stood there on the doorstep, torn between the fear of exposing herself and her growing curiosity. Arthur pretended not to notice, but he smiled inwardly. He knew that movement. It was the same one Manuela used to make when she was little, testing the boundaries, wanting to get closer, but afraid of fully committing. He continued to work. Another 20 minutes passed. Then he heard light footsteps on the grass. He turned discreetly and saw Valentina a few feet behind him, watching. She was barefoot, her yellow dress stained with grass, the paper bird still in her hand. "Want to see what I'm doing?" Arthur asked softly. Valentina didn't answer, but she took a few more steps. She was now beside him, looking at the flower bed where he was working. "This here is a rose bush," Arthur explained, pointing. "It's a little sad because no one's been taking care of it. But look," he moved some dry branches aside. "There are new shoots down here. That means it wants to live. It just needs some help." He took his pruning shears and carefully showed Valentina how to cut the dead branches. He saw her eyes following his every move. Then, on an impulse, he held the shears out to her. "Want to try?" The girl looked at the tool, then at him. Slowly, she extended her free hand and took the shears. Arthur guided her hand, showing her where to cut. "Not here, see? Down here where the branch is still alive. That's it. Just like that." When Valentina made the cut and the dead branch fell, she looked at Arthur with something that could be considered pride. He smiled. "Very good. You've got a knack for this." They worked together for another half-hour. Valentina mostly observed and occasionally helped when Arthur asked for something simple. Hold a bag, point to where he should plant something, touch the soil to feel its texture. There were no words from her, but there was presence, and that was already extraordinary. When Arthur finished his work for the day, Valentina walked him to the gate. He said goodbye with another origami, this time a paper flower made from a piece of newspaper he had in his pocket. She accepted the gift carefully and stood there, watching him leave, waving discreetly when he turned to wave one last time. Gabriel had watched everything from his office window. When Valentina came back inside, he was waiting for her, in the living room. "It looked like you enjoyed helping in the garden." Valentina looked at him. She said nothing, but went up to her room with the two origami pieces, the bird and the flower, holding them like treasures. In the following days, the pattern repeated. Arthur would arrive, start working, and Valentina would eventually come out to watch or help. Mrs. Ellie would prepare juice and snacks and bring them to the garden, leaving them on a small table they had placed there. Arthur always thanked her, and sometimes Valentina would take a cookie and eat it right. There, sitting on the grass next to him, watching the insects, the plants, the movement of the earth under the tools, the garden began to be reborn. But it wasn't just the garden. Something was changing in Valentina too. She still didn't speak, but her silence was different. It was no longer that oppressive emptiness, but something lighter, more present. She started eating better, sleeping more soundly. Sometimes she would draw, something she hadn't done in months. Simple drawings of flowers, tools, a man working in a garden. Gabriel watched it all with complex feelings. He was deeply grateful to Arthur. He could clearly see that the man was doing for his daughter what he himself had not been able to do. But there was also a pang of something he didn't want to admit, a touch of jealousy, a feeling of inadequacy. Why could a stranger succeed where he, the father, failed? Mrs. Ellie, ever observant, noticed. One afternoon, as they were preparing dinner together, she decided to broach the subject. "Mr. Hayes, can I say something?" "Of course, Ellie." "You're feeling bad because the girl has gotten close to Arthur, aren't you?" Gabriel stopped chopping vegetables and sighed. I shouldn't feel this way. I know he's helping her. I should just be thankful. But you feel it anyway, and it's okay to feel it. What you can't do is let that feeling get in the way of what's working. I know. It's just... He paused, searching for words. I feel like I failed her, Ellie. I'm her father. I should be the person she seeks out when she needs comfort. But I'm not. She looks at me and I see that distance. With him, it's different. Mrs. Ellie put down what she was doing and held Gabriel's hands. Firmly, listen to me. You did not fail. You stayed. When her mother left, you stayed. Every day, every morning, you're here. That's not failure. Sometimes children need things we can't give them, and that doesn't make what we do give any less valuable. Arthur has something that connects with her pain in a different way. Maybe he has his own wounds, and wounds recognize each other. But your love is there, every day, every moment. She knows that, even without showing it. Gabriel felt his eyes sting. I just want her back, Ellie. I want to hear her voice. Again. Hear her call me Dad. And you will, but in her own time. And in the meantime, you continue to be her father, her safe harbor, even if she doesn't show it. Being a father isn't just about the good moments. It's about being present in the difficult ones too. And you are. That night, Gabriel went into Valentina's room at bedtime. She was lying down, looking at the origami pieces that now formed a small collection on her nightstand. He sat on the edge of the bed. Sweetheart, he began softly, I want you to know that I love you. No matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, I will be here, always, and I'm happy that Arthur is helping you. He's a good person. Valentina turned her face and looked at her father. For the first time in months, it wasn't a vacant stare. There was something there, some recognition, some connection. She said nothing, but she reached out her small hand and touched Gabriel's face, a brief gesture, but laden with meaning. Gabriel held that little hand and kissed its palm. Good night, sweetheart. Sleep well. When he left the room, Mrs. Ellie was in the hallway. From her eyes, Gabriel could tell she had witnessed the scene. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Arthur arrived at his small room, tired but with a strange sense of fulfillment. There was something about that job that went far beyond the money. That silent girl touched him in ways he couldn't explain. He saw in her reflections of Manuela, of the childhood he couldn't be a part of the hugs he couldn't give. He sat on his bed and picked up his old phone. There was only one important number in it, Denise's. He hadn't called in months, tired of the sharp replies, the always accusatory tone, but that night he felt like trying. He dialed. She answered on the third ring. Hello? Denise, it's me, Arthur. Silence on the other end. Then an impatient sigh. What do you want? I wanted to know about Manuela. How is she? Is she doing well in school? She's fine. You don't need to worry. I know I don't need to, but I want to. She's my daughter, Denise. A daughter you haven't seen in 3 years. A daughter who doesn't even ask about you anymore. The words hurt, but Arthur swallowed the pain. You know I tried. You're the one who makes everything difficult. I make it difficult. I give her a life you could never give her. A private school, good clothes, opportunities. You're still there taking care of gardens, living in that little room. What do you have to offer her besides longing? Arthur closed his eyes. Love. I have love to offer. Love doesn't pay the bills, Arthur. It doesn't provide an education. It doesn't give her a future. You're a good man, I know. But you're not what Manuela needs right now. Leave her alone. Let her grow up without the confusion of feeling like she has to choose between us. I never asked her to choose. But you do every time you try to show up. Look, Denise's voice softened, almost gentle. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because I think it's for the best, for her sake. Let time pass. When she's older, if she wants to find you, then fine. And what if she doesn't want to? Then that's her choice, but at least she'll grown up without all this back and forth. Arthur hung up without another word. He sat there in the dark, feeling the familiar weight of absence. It was always like this. Every time he tried to get closer to Manuela, he was pushed away. And the worst part was that a part of him understood Denise's reasoning. She really had managed to give their daughter a better life materially, a life that he, with his gardens and his manual labor, could never provide. But did that make his love less valid? The fact that he couldn't buy expensive things, that he didn't have a college degree, that he lived a simple life, did that erase the importance of being a father? He lay down without changing his clothes, too tired to move. He thought of Valentina, of those sad eyes that seemed to be slowly rediscovering some light. He thought of Manuela, so distant and unreachable. Two girls, two absences, two different pains that were connected somehow. He fell asleep with the feeling that he was building something with Valentina, but irreversibly losing Manuela. And he didn't know if that was fair to either of them. 2 weeks passed, and the garden of the yellow house was unrecognizable. The rose bushes were blooming again, the flower beds were organized with harmonious color combinations, and the uniform, verdant grass formed a soft carpet. But the most impressive transformation was not in the plants. It was in Valentina. The girl now came out of the house as soon as she heard the sound of the gate opening, announcing Arthur's arrival. She actively helped him, carrying small tools, watering the plants under his supervision, learning the names of the species. Laughter returned before words, just as Mrs. Ellie had predicted. Low, shy laughs, but real. The most beautiful sound Gabriel had heard in months. One Saturday morning, Arthur brought a surprise, a rock painting kit. There were some decorative stones left over from the work in the garden, and he thought Valentina might like to turn them into art. They sat on the grass together, and he showed her how to clean the stones, how to apply the paint, how to create simple patterns. Valentina concentrated intensely, her tongue between her teeth, her small fingers stained with paint. She painted one stone yellow, with orange dots that could be flowers or stars. When she finished, she proudly showed it to Arthur. "It's beautiful," he said, genuinely impressed. "You've got talent. Let's put it here in the flower bed so everyone can see your art." For the first time in months, Valentina didn't just smile. She laughed. A short laugh, almost a sound of surprise, as if she had forgotten she was capable of making that sound. But there it was, real and spontaneous. Gabriel, watching from the porch with Mrs. Ellie, felt tears fall before he even realized he was crying. "My daughter is back," he murmured. "She's back, Ellie." The housekeeper squeezed his arm tenderly. "Not completely yet, but she's coming back. Slowly, but she is." The following days were full of discoveries. Valentina began to draw obsessively, drawings of flowers, of tools, of a man with his hands in the earth. Some drawings were of herself next to him, always surrounded by nature. There were no words in the drawings, but there was a narrative. There was a story. There was life. Arthur, for his part, found in this bond something that filled the void left by Manuela's absence. It wasn't a replacement, he knew that, and constantly policed himself not to cross that line. But it was a way to channel all that paternal love that had nowhere to go, all that tenderness that was dammed up. Valentina received it without judgment, without demands, simply accepting and reciprocating in her own way. Gabriel watched everything with growing gratitude, but also with an insecurity he couldn't completely shake. One afternoon, he decided to approach Arthur directly. The two men were on the porch, drinking the coffee Mrs. Ellie had prepared, while Valentina played in the garden, arranging her painted stones in geometric patterns. "Arthur, I want to thank you," Gabriel began. "I don't know how, but you've accomplished something no one else could. My daughter is coming back because of you." Arthur stirred his coffee, uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't do anything special. I just treated her with respect and patience." "It was more than that. You gave her genuine attention. You didn't try to force anything. You didn't demand anything from her. That made the difference." There was a silence. Arthur looked at Valentina and then, in a burst of honesty, decided to share. "I have a daughter," he said. "Manuela, she's 9. I haven't seen her in 3 years." Gabriel looked at him, surprised. 3 years, why?" Her mother made everything difficult after we separated. She took the girl to Chicago, said I had nothing to offer, that it would be better if I stayed away. I tried to fight, but I didn't have the resources for a legal battle. So, Arthur took a deep breath, I accepted it, but the longing never went away. And when I saw Valentina there, in that window, so lost, I think I saw Manuela too. I saw a chance to do something that I can't do with my own daughter. Gabriel felt his chest tighten. Now he understood better. Now he understood Arthur's dedication, his infinite patience, his affectionate yet respectful manner. It wasn't just professionalism, it was redirected love. I'm sorry, Gabriel said. That must be very hard. It is, but somehow being here, helping Valentina, it gives me a purpose. It makes me feel like I can still be a good father, even if it's not to my own daughter. You are a good father, Arthur, and a good man. My daughter was lucky you passed by here. The two men sat in silence, united by that mutual understanding of different but equally profound paternal pains. It was Mrs. Ellie who broke the moment, calling them for lunch. Gabriel had insisted that Arthur start having lunch with them on the days he worked, and the gardener, after much reluctance, had accepted. The meals were simple, but full of meaning. Valentina always sat next to Arthur, sometimes touching his arm to draw his attention to something, other times just watching him eat, as if she wanted to memorize every detail. Gabriel tried not to feel excluded, but it was difficult. He saw the connection between the two, and although he was grateful, he also felt a pang of inadequacy. It was Mrs. Ellie who once again put things into perspective. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she said to Gabriel, "You need to understand that it's not about competing. The girl needs both of you in different ways. Arthur is helping her open up again. But you are her father, you are the foundation. He is the special visitor, but you are the home." Gabriel wanted to believe that. He really did. But insecurity is a subtle poison that seeps into even the most solid certainties. Things began to get complicated on a Wednesday afternoon. Arthur was finishing his work when a car pulled up in front of the house. A woman got out, looking to be in her late 30s, with dark hair and a tired expression. It was Denise, Arthur's ex-partner. He froze when he saw her. "Denise, what are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you. Manuela mentioned you were working in this area. I asked around at the shops, and they pointed me to a few houses. I found you." Arthur glanced nervously at Valentina, who was watching the scene with curiosity. Now is not a good time. Denise looked at the girl, then at Arthur, and something in her expression changed. It was suspicion mixed with understanding. "I see," she said, in a tone Arthur didn't like. "You've replaced Manuela." "What? No, it's nothing like that." "Then what is it? You don't fight for our daughter, but you're here playing dad with someone else's child." "It's not like that, Denise. I work here. The girl, she needed help, and you decided to be her hero since you can't be Manuela's." "Arthur, you're pathetic." The words hurt more than any physical blow could have. Arthur felt anger rising, but he controlled it. He wasn't going to make a scene in front of Valentina. "Why did you come here, just to attack me?" "I came because you're 3 months behind on rent. The landlord is threatening to evict you. I thought you should know." Arthur closed his eyes. He had spent the extra money he was earning here on the garden, sending it to Manuela. Gifts that Denise probably never even mentioned were from him. There was nothing left for the overdue bills. "I'll take care of it." "How?" Denise crossed her arms. "Besides, if you need money, why don't you ask your boss there? You two seem to be quite close. I'm not asking him for anything. I'll figure it out myself. Always too proud for your own good." Denise turned to leave, but stopped and turned back. "You know what's worse, Arthur. You have so much love to give, but you can't give it to the one who really matters. You're wasting it on strangers while your own daughter grows up without you." She left before he could reply. Arthur stood there, paralyzed, feeling the weight of every word. Valentina approached and touched his hand. He looked at her and tried to smile, but he couldn't. "Sorry, little one. I have to leave early today." He walked out the gate without looking back, leaving his tools and a confused Valentina watching his sudden departure. Gabriel, who had witnessed part of the scene from the window, rushed downstairs. What happened? Who was that woman? Mrs. Ellie was already in the garden, comforting Valentina, who seemed on the verge of tears, though none fell. The girl was agitated, rocking slightly, holding her own arm in a gesture of self-comfort. That night Gabriel couldn't sleep. He thought about Arthur, about the snippets of conversation he had overheard, about the expression on the woman's face who was clearly accusing him of something. He also thought about Valentina, who had retreated back to her room, refusing dinner, returning to the window. The next morning he decided to investigate. He made a few discreet calls, talked to neighbors, and finally got the phone number of Arthur's landlord. He found out about the overdue rent. Without a second thought, he drove to the address, found the owner, and paid the debt in full, plus 3 months in advance. He thought he was helping. He thought he was being a good friend. He didn't imagine how it would be interpreted. When Arthur arrived for work on Friday, 2 days after the encounter with Denise, he brought a letter of resignation with him. He couldn't look Gabriel in the eye when he handed it over. "I can't work here anymore." Gabriel was stunned. "What? Why?" "Because I found out you paid my rent." Arthur finally faced him, and there was anger in those usually gentle eyes. "You had no right. You had no right to do that. I just wanted to help. You're going through a hard time and what? Am I a charity case? I work, I earn my money, I solve my own problems. I don't need a handout disguised as kindness." "It wasn't a handout. It was gratitude. You helped my daughter when no one else could. Let me repay you somehow." "You repay me by taking care of your daughter, not by buying my dignity." Arthur took a deep breath, trying to control his emotion. "You don't understand. I already hear every day that I'm not enough, that I have nothing to offer, that I'm just a gardener with no future. And now you confirm all of that by treating my problems as if I were an incapable child." "That's not what I meant. Arthur, please, don't do this. Valentina, she needs you. And that's exactly why I have to go. Because this isn't healthy. I'm not her father. You are. And the longer I stay, the more I confuse my role and the more she pulls away from you. I'm already hurting my own daughter by being here. I'm not going to do the same to yours." Gabriel tried to argue, but Arthur was already leaving. Valentina, who was watching everything from the porch, let out a sound she hadn't made in months, a sharp, desperate cry. She ran after Arthur and grabbed his shirt with both hands, pulling, silently pleading for him to stay. Arthur knelt in front of her, his eyes red. "I'm sorry, little one, I'm really sorry, but I can't stay. You have your dad, you have Mrs. Ellie. They'll take care of you." Valentina shook her head violently, tears finally falling. She held Arthur's face with her small hands, trying to make him understand without words how much she needed him to stay. It was Mrs. Ellie who intervened, gently taking Valentina into her arms. The girl struggled, thrashed, but eventually surrendered to the housekeeper's embrace, sobbing silently as Arthur walked out the gate for the last time. In the following days, Valentina regressed. She stopped eating properly, returned to her room, to the window. She didn't draw anymore. She didn't go outside anymore. It was as if all the months of progress had been erased in a single afternoon. Gabriel was desperate, Mrs. Ellie extremely worried. "Mr. Hayes," she said on the third night, watching Valentina refuse dinner once again, "you have to bring him back. It doesn't matter what his pride says. The girl is dying inside again. But he doesn't want to come back. I offended his pride. Then you go and you fix it. You go and tell him the truth, that you were wrong, that you understand now, that you need him. Men need to learn to swallow their pride sometimes, for the sake of those they love." Gabriel knew she was right. He had to try. For his daughter, he had to set his pride aside and find Arthur, even if it meant admitting his mistakes, even if it meant humbling himself. That night he made his decision. He would go to Arthur the next day. He would do whatever it took to bring him back. Because in the end, what mattered wasn't his bruised ego or the emotional complications of the adults. What mattered was that little girl in her room looking out the window, waiting for someone who wouldn't show up at the usual time. What mattered was Valentina, and she needed Arthur back. Saturday morning arrived grey over Denver. with those dense clouds that promised rain but took their time to deliver. Gabriel had barely slept, mentally rehearsing what he would say to Arthur. It wasn't just about bringing the gardener back. It was about admitting he had crossed a line, that his attempt to help was, in fact, a display of superiority disguised as kindness. He dressed simply and left early, even before Mrs. Ellie arrived. He left a note saying he would be back soon and took his car toward the address he had discovered days earlier. Arthur's room was in a narrow alley, in a cluster of small residences that looked more like improvised annexes to a larger house. The paint was peeling, the roof had visible patches, but everything was clean and tidy. He knocked on the door, his heart racing. It took a moment, but eventually he heard footsteps on the other side. When the door opened, Arthur appeared in an old t-shirt and sweatpants, his eyes swollen as if he hadn't slept well in days. When he saw Gabriel, his expression immediately hardened. "What do you want?" "To talk, please. 5 minutes." Arthur hesitated, but eventually made way. Gabriel entered the small room and felt his chest tighten. The space was tiny, arranged with almost obsessive care, but definitely precarious. A single bed, a small stove, a table with 2 mismatched chairs. On the wall, a few photos. Gabriel recognized a girl who must have been Manuela, smiling at the camera with a joy that contrasted with the sadness of the room. "Just say it," Arthur said, crossing his arms. Gabriel took a deep breath. "I came to apologize, for real. You were right. I had no right to do what I did. It wasn't to help. It was to make myself feel good, to feel powerful. And in the process, I disrespected you, your dignity, your pride. I was arrogant and stupid." Arthur said nothing, but his posture relaxed slightly. "I don't understand half of what you go through," Gabriel continued. "I don't understand what it's like to have a daughter you can't see. I don't understand the pain of being kept from someone you love. But I do understand what it feels like to be powerless. I understand what it's like to see your child suffering and be unable to do anything. And when you showed up and achieved what I couldn't, I was grateful, but I was also jealous, because you were the hero and I was just the failed father. You're not a failed father. But that's how I feel, and maybe that's why I did it, to prove to myself that I still had something to offer, that I was still useful somehow. But I did it the wrong way. And now," Gabriel felt his voice break, "now my daughter is worse than ever. She's gone back to silence. She's not eating, not sleeping right. She needs you, Arthur, not as a replacement for me, but as someone who reached her in a way no one else could. Please come back, not for me, but for her." Arthur turned away, his hands on his face. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You know what the worst part of all this is? It's that I needed her too. I needed that connection, that feeling of making a difference in a child's life. Because with Manuela I can't. Denise is right about some things. I don't have much to offer materially. I don't have a degree. I don't have a promising career. I'm just a gardener who can barely pay his own rent. How am I supposed to fight for my daughter if I can barely take care of myself?" "Your hands make gardens be reborn," Gabriel said softly. "Your hands made my daughter be reborn. That's not a small thing, Arthur. That's everything. Value isn't measured in money or degrees. It's measured in love, in patience, in being truly present. And you have that, in abundance. But it's not enough. It is for Valentina. And I bet it would be for Manuela too if she had the chance. Look," Gabriel moved closer. "I don't know how to solve your problem with your daughter, but I know you can't give up. Not on her and not on Valentina, because they both need you. In different ways, but they need you." Arthur finally turned around, his eyes red. "And what if I come back, and this happens again? If it creates an unhealthy dependency? Then we learn to deal with it, together. Me as her father, you as," he searched for the right word, "as someone important in her life. It doesn't need a specific name. You just need to be there." The two men looked at each other for a long moment. Then Arthur nodded almost imperceptibly. "Okay, I'll come back, but on one condition." "What is it?" "Stop trying to save me. If I need help, I'll ask. Treat me as an equal, not as a project." "Deal." They shook hands, and something was sealed there. A true friendship, based on mutual respect and an understanding of shared pains. When Gabriel returned home and told Mrs. Ellie what had happened, the housekeeper smiled with the wisdom of someone who always knew things would work out. "Now, you go upstairs and tell the girl. She needs to know." Gabriel climbed the stairs slowly, his heart tight with anticipation. He knocked on Valentina's bedroom door before entering. She was at the window, as always, but she turned her head when she heard her father come in. "Sweetheart, I have some news. Arthur is coming back. He'll be back to take care of the garden on Monday." For the first time in years, Gabriel saw something in Valentina's eyes that could be considered hope. She said nothing, but she got up from the window and did something she hadn't done in months. She hugged her father. It was a brief, still hesitant hug, but it was real. Gabriel held her carefully, as if afraid she might break. "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart, I promise." Monday arrived with a shy sun that finally managed to break through the clouds. Arthur appeared at the agreed time, and Valentina was waiting at the gate, holding the 2 origami pieces he had made for her as if they were sacred amulets. When she saw him, she ran and hugged his legs, holding on tight. Arthur felt his chest explode. He knelt and returned the hug, allowing himself to feel it all without guilt, without fear. "I'm sorry I left," he said, "but I'm back now, and I'm going to stay, okay?" The following days were about rebuilding. The bond between Arthur and Valentina grew even stronger, but now there was also more space for Gabriel. The 3 of them began to have moments together, working in the garden, preparing new flower beds, painting more decorative stones. Mrs. Ellie watched it all with satisfaction, preparing snacks and juices that she served to the trio in the garden. It was on one of those afternoons that something unexpected happened. Arthur was showing Valentina how to plant sunflower seeds when a small figure appeared at the gate. A girl with brown hair, large, curious eyes, about 9 years old with a backpack on her shoulders. "Dad," she called out hesitantly. Arthur froze. When he turned and saw who was there, he could hardly believe it. "Manuela." The girl nodded shyly. "Mom said I could come visit. She's waiting in the car over there." Arthur stood up in a sudden movement and ran to the gate. He looked down the street and saw Denise in a parked car a few yards away. She made a gesture with her hand, something between a wave and a farewell, and drove off, leaving Manuela there. "What? How?" Arthur was too stunned to form complete sentences. Manuela shrugged. "She said you deserve a chance, that maybe she was unfair, and that I should get to know my real dad, not just from her stories." Arthur knelt in front of his daughter, tears falling without any attempt to hide them. "Manuela, I missed you so much. So much." "Me too, Dad." She threw herself into his arms, and the 2 of them stayed there, hugging, crying together, 3 years of distance dissolving in a single moment. Valentina watched everything with curiosity, and something that Gabriel, from a distance, identified as jealousy. She approached slowly, looking at this unknown girl who was hugging her Arthur. Arthur, noticing, opened one arm. "Valentina, come here. I want you to meet someone very special. This is Manuela, my daughter." Valentina looked at Manuela with suspicion. Manuela looked back, equally unsure. The 2 girls sized each other up for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. It was Manuela who broke the silence. "Do you like planting flowers?" Valentina nodded slowly. "I've never planted one. Can you teach me?" And just like that, the tension dissipated. The 2 girls began to talk. Valentina with gestures and expressions since she wasn't speaking yet, Manuela with soft, curious words. Arthur watched, amazed, seeing 2 worlds he never imagined could meet, finally connecting. Mrs. Ellie prepared a special snack that afternoon. Gabriel joined the group in the garden, and for the first time in a long time there was an atmosphere of family there, not a traditional family, but something different, more complex, more real. People connected not by blood or social roles, but by genuine affection and mutual need. But the harmony was to be tested one more time. On Wednesday of the following week, when everyone was in the garden, A taxi pulled up in front of the house. A woman got out, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive clothes. Gabriel recognized her immediately. Marina. Valentina's mother had returned. His blood ran cold. Marina walked through the gate as if she still owned the place, her gaze sweeping over the garden, the people, until it landed on Valentina. The girl, upon seeing her mother, froze completely. She didn't run to hug her. She didn't smile. She simply froze, her eyes wide with fear. "Hello, Valentina," Marina said, her voice soft, but with that artificial tone Gabriel knew so well. "My beautiful daughter, Mummy's back." Valentina took a step back, then another. Then she ran and hid behind Arthur, clutching his shirt tightly. Arthur didn't know what to do, looking to Gabriel for direction. Marina watched this with an expression that mixed surprise and anger. "Valentina, come here to Mommy, now." The girl shook her head violently, shrinking further behind Arthur. "Who are you?" Marina asked Arthur, her tone now clearly hostile. "I'm the gardener," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "The gardener," Marina repeated sarcastically. "And why is my daughter hiding behind a gardener instead of coming to hug me?" Gabriel finally found his voice. "Because you abandoned her, Marina. Without explanation, without a goodbye. You disappeared and left her broken." Marina turned to him, fury in her eyes. "Don't you lecture me, Gabriel. I needed space. I needed to find out who I was outside of this role of a mother that never quite fit me. But I came back. And I find my daughter traumatized, clinging to a complete stranger. What did you do? What did he do to her?" "Nothing that you... It didn't cause. He was just present. Something you never were." Marina looked at Arthur with contempt. "I can imagine how much he charges for this presence. How much are you paying him to be a nanny?" "He's not a nanny," Gabriel said, his voice rising. "He's someone who genuinely cares about Valentina. Something you never did right." "How dare you? I'm her mother." "Being a mother isn't just biology, Marina. It's being present. It's choosing to stay even when it gets hard." Marina was visibly furious now. "I want my daughter. I have a right." "A right? You gave up." "Any right when you abandoned her." The argument was escalating dangerously. Valentina began to sob silently, clutching Arthur even tighter. Manuela, frightened by the scene, moved closer and held Valentina's hand, offering silent support. It was Mrs. Ellie who intervened, placing herself physically between Marina and the others. "Enough, both of you. Look at the girl. Look what this fighting is doing to her." Everyone stopped. Valentina was trembling, her eyes full of tears, her body huddled. It was clear she was having an emotional breakdown. Marina tried to approach again. "Valentina, sweetheart, come with Mommy. Let's talk. Just the two of us. We'll go for a walk, like we used to." Valentina's reaction was immediate and desperate. She began to cry uncontrollably, shaking her head, making high-pitched sounds of protest. She clung to Arthur with a surprising strength for someone so small, silently begging not to be taken away. "No," Arthur said finally. His voice was firm, protective. "She doesn't want to go, and I'm not going to let you force her." Marina stared at him with fury. "You have no authority over my daughter. Who do you think you are?" "I'm someone who was here. I'm someone who saw her suffer and helped as I could. And I'm not going to stand by and watch you hurt her again." Gabriel felt something shift inside him. Seeing Arthur defend Valentina with such conviction, seeing his daughter clearly choose this man over her own biological mother, he finally understood what Mrs. Ellie had been trying to explain all along. Family wasn't about blood or titles. It was about who stayed, about who loved unconditionally. "Marina," Gabriel said, with a calmness he didn't know he possessed, "you need to leave." "What?" "You need to leave. Now. And if you try anything, legal, any attempt to force contact, I will fight you with everything I have, because the priority here is the emotional health of my daughter. Our daughter. And you are a threat to it." Marina looked around, realizing she was alone in this battle. Everyone there was united against her. "You'll all regret this," she said, her voice trembling with restrained anger. I'll get my rights. I'll prove this situation is harmful." "You can try," Gabriel replied, "but you won't succeed, because there is real love here, something you never offered." Marina left in a rage, slamming the door of the taxi that had been waiting. When the car disappeared around the corner, everyone finally breathed a sigh of relief. Valentina was still hugging Arthur, but she had stopped crying. Slowly, she let go and looked at her father. Gabriel knelt in front of her. "It's okay, sweetheart, she's not going to take you, I promise." And then, for the first time in 2 years, Valentina spoke. A single word, whispered but clear. "Dad." The world stopped. Gabriel felt tears stream down his face uncontrollably. Valentina had spoken. She said, "Dad." Mrs. Ellie brought a hand to her mouth, emotional. Arthur smiled through watery eyes. Manuela squeezed Valentina's hand affectionately. Valentina then looked at Arthur and said another word. "Stay." He nodded, unable to speak. She pulled him and her father into a hug, the three of them together there in the middle of the garden that had witnessed this whole transformation. In the following days, Valentina began to speak more. Single words at first, then short sentences. It was as if, being certain she wouldn't be abandoned again, certain she had people around her who truly loved her, she finally allowed herself to emerge completely from that cocoon of silence. One afternoon, a few weeks later, she gave Gabriel and Arthur a notebook she had secretly made with Manuela. Each page had an origami piece glued to it, and on each origami was a written word: flower, hug, fear, sun, garden, dad, friend, family. It was the emotional vocabulary she had built, each word representing a piece of her healing process. The last page had a drawing, 3 figures holding hands, surrounded by flowers and sun. Underneath, written in the uneven but determined handwriting of a child, "My family." Gabriel looked at Arthur, at Manuela, at Valentina, at Mrs. Ellie, who watched from the porch with a proud smile. Yes, he thought, this was their family. Unconventional, not perfect but real. Built not on social expectations or biological obligations, but on presence, patience, and genuine love. Arthur had found a way to be a father again, to channel all the affection he carried. Manuela began to visit them regularly, and although she still lived with her mother, she now had her father's active presence in her life. Denise, to everyone's surprise, accepted the arrangement, acknowledging that she had been unfair. Valentina, little by little, became a child again. Not the same one as before, because traumas shape and transform, but a child who knew how to laugh, who knew how to trust, who knew there were people around her willing to stay even when things got difficult. And Gabriel learned that being a father didn't mean being everything to his daughter. It meant recognizing when she needed other connections, when other people could offer what he couldn't. It meant sharing, not competing. It meant loving enough to accept help. On a quiet Sunday afternoon months later, they were all gathered in the garden for lunch. Valentina and Manuela played among the flowers, creating elaborate stories with painted stones and origami. Mrs. Ellie served the food while telling stories of her youth. Gabriel and Arthur talked about plans to expand the garden, perhaps add a small vegetable patch. Through the window, the late afternoon light illuminated the scene with that characteristic Denver gold. It was a simple, ordinary moment, but laden with meaning. It was proof that healing is possible, that families can be built in unconventional ways, that love has the power to rebuild what abandonment destroys. Valentina looked at Gabriel, at Arthur, at Manuela, and smiled. A full, genuine, life-filled smile. And in that moment, everyone there knew that yes, they had made it. Together, each with their wounds and their strengths, they had managed to create something beautiful in the midst of pain. They had created a garden, not just of plants, but of affection, of true connections, of shared healing. A garden where each one could grow at their own pace, supported by the others, protected by the love they chose to build together. And on the living room wall, Gabriel framed Valentina's drawing, those 3 figures holding hands under the sun. It wasn't the family he had planned, but it was the family they had, and it was perfect just the way it was. End of story. Dear listeners, We hope the story of Gabriel, Valentina, and Arthur has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of healing, love, and family reconstruction, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it Valentina's first smile, Gabriel's courage in admitting his mistakes, Arthur's unconditional love? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul, showing that family is about who chooses to stay, not about who shares the same blood. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the bonds that truly matter in life.